don't hit those performance metrics, they're going to feel like they lost out on the equity.
Planting all these seeds that help to create more preference towards you.
You praise the prospect even though they turned you down.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. Before we begin, just as a reminder, for more tips, strategies, and information for growing your business faster, more predictably, and less dependent on you, check us out over at predictableprofits.com. All right. So today's guest actually came highly referred to me by another client and a good friend. He says, Charlie, this particular gentleman, his zone of genius is marketing and sales. I said, I can't really tell you who he's brought in as clients, but if you just do a little bit of research, you'll be able to find out who these folks are. Very hard to get to type of clients. For many business owners, they would be considered like your dream clients. So we're not talking about like little spenders. We're talking about dream clients with deep pockets. And to be able to have these type of clients in your portfolio is phenomenal. Now, it's one thing to be able to get one, as many companies might be able to get one or two. This particular gentleman, especially as I dug a little bit deeper, he had more or less the biggest names in the entire industry, especially in the financial industry. And the hardest thing about getting to these clients is that they're on everybody's radar. So it's not just like, hitting a salesperson, hitting them once or twice. Like, these people are getting hit hundreds of times every single day because they're the dream list of almost anybody within his industry. So the fact that he was able to just carve through the noise, land them as clients, it speaks volumes about his abilities, as well as just the company in general. So I wanted to make sure that I introduce him to you, because there's going to be some really cool stuff that we're going to get from today's conversation. So this particular gentleman, he's a president of a company called Saphyre. Now, Saphyre is a patented AI-powered both pre- and post-trade ops platform that's for financial institutions. And it helps them do all sorts of things that lead to faster trade settlements and less failed trades. And the cool thing is he's doing this with his twin brother. And they've raised quite a bit of money. I mean, they raised 18.7 in a Series A, which is pretty cool. But when I talk about those clients, I had to do a little bit of research. And I found out he's got clients like BlackRock, JP Morgan, Citi, BNY Mellon, Deutsche Bank, London Stock Exchange. And you think about it, more or less, it's their clients. It's pretty wild. So have all these awards. They've been featured in all these places. Look, let's just get right into the meat of things, right? Stephen Roche, welcome to the show, my man.
Thank you, Charles, for having me. I mean, that was an awesome introduction. You're almost making me blush with that intro, so that was great. Thank you.
No worries. It's extraordinary. I mean, you've accomplished a lot in a very busy and a very crowded space. I've been playing in the space for a long time. Actually, what a lot of people don't know about me is many years ago, I started my very own proprietary stock trading company. We ran millions of dollars in the markets, all algorithmic and whatnot, before AI and all this other fun stuff. So I have a sense for what this space is like, how cutthroat it is, how difficult it is to crack through, and so forth. So I have a lot of respect for what you're able to accomplish. I guess to just kind of kick things off. So what you've done isn't by accident. And I don't believe that it's product-led growth alone that got you there. I'm sure your product is extraordinary. You wouldn't have the logos that you do if it wasn't extraordinary. So what was it? What was it that got you these clients?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say it's all my sales tactics, which we'll get into at a later point here, but I have to give a tremendous amount of credit to my identical twin brother. He came up with a great go-to-market strategy, right? So he's developed products for years, and a lot of people, when they develop software products or products in general, they always talk about efficiencies or savings that you can get. But when you find a way to tie products to new revenue that customers can garner from using your technology, then it compels the clients to be more excited about adopting a new software solution or a new tech enhancement, because it's not just about operational savings. Everyone talks about savings and efficiencies. New revenue means you have a competitive edge over your peers. And so we created that kind of a great mousetrap, I would say, in
Yeah.
making a great product with an awesome incentive for people to look to adopt and acquire.
So, so that's interesting, right? Because this isn't, you're actually asking somebody to not only invest in your product, but it's going to change some of what they're doing already, right? So they're either going to have to replace something else that they're using, or there's going to be some level of integration into their existing processes, correct?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I would say. In general, what we're doing is you're familiar in your space. You touched trading. You were talking about your background. We're doing the kind of unsexy stuff, everything before the trade and everything after the trade. So if I met an executive, let's say James Timon in the elevator, I had to do a pitch real fast for him. I would tell him that we can get his firm ready to trade as fast as 24 hours on the launch of a new fund. And on
Yeah.
the back of the trade executions, we can help settle those trades in near real time. We're doing this through our AI patented technology you referred to just a moment ago.
Yeah.
We have 108 of them that remembers a data point entered and a document shared through the life cycle of the fund, from inception to settlement. And you named all these big clients that are already using us. That gives us market validation. In the case of how we're tying it to new revenue, and I talk about the starting to launch, to be ready to trade on the launch of a new fund. If a large investment manager won theoretically the Walmart pension fund, before our technology existed, they were doing this through email, fax, and spreadsheets. Okay, I believe
Yeah.
faxes were still a thing. They still do this to this day in some cases. But it could take 6 weeks to 6 months to 18 months to start trading on that new fund. So Walmart might not be necessarily happy with you as an investment manager and getting those returns that you may have promised them. And the markets start changing and moving, and it makes them a little nervous. Well, now we have the opportunity to get those investment managers to start showing returns on those new funds as fast as tomorrow, right? That's a
Wow.
dramatic change, and that's the incentive. So we have been known in the industry as a client onboarding solution, but we're more than that. We're really a golden source of truth, of reconciliation of data between external counterparties. External counterparties, as if you're an investment manager versus a broker dealer versus a custodian. You're talking about tri-party communication. Right now, a lot of people do what's called reconciliation, and because a lot of solutions were on the prem, on site, they're not in the cloud, because there was paranoia about being in the cloud 10
Yeah.
years ago, right? And so if I sent you an Excel file, Charles, and somebody else sent you one, but they added one additional row in there, you wouldn't know how reliable my data is versus someone else's. And so they do this reconciliation component. But if you have one record in the cloud, and we can guarantee the authenticity of that data, because we have incentivized these counterparties I just described to share their data on our platform to be ready to trade quickly to garner new revenue, then you are self-curating that information, validating what's in the cloud. That's real.
So what I'm hearing then is that this is less about product-led growth. Instead, you became so intimate over the problem and solving a problem that it's costing them a lot of money, that for them there's actually two decisions that they have to make. It's working with you, obviously, for the onboarding part and helping with the client. But there's also this cost of inaction, because as you mentioned, it might take a couple months to get them to actually start trading the actual fund. That cost of inaction is significant, not just for the client, but for companies like BlackRock or whatnot, just that long delay. So you're solving that. And I guess if the problem is big enough, you're going to get somebody's attention a lot easier than if it's a mere inconvenience, right? We're not talking about a mere inconvenience, right? We're talking about, this is a real problem that's costing these companies millions and millions of dollars. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, it's costing money on opportunity loss, because you're missing out on trades, or you're missing out on the market changes. As an investment manager, you want to make those decisions quickly and start showing returns for your end client. In our case, we flipped it on its head. We focused on the investment managers in this world because they're the ones bringing the assets of the management to those broker dealers and custodians. In a lot of cases, solutions are being made for one bank. And when I say bank, I include both brokers and custodians in that. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to break it out into finance and in the B2B space, you become a solution for one firm, whether that's Citigroup or whoever, just theoretically. Okay. But what happens is what my brother understood, because he's been in finance for 20 plus years before we started this endeavor together, he saw how the data isn't consistent from a JP Morgan, Citi, Bank of America, it doesn't matter who it is. They see their world as they see it themselves, and they have their own processes and nomenclature. It's as if you and I may care about luxury sedans, and you like Mercedes, I like BMW. We want a four-door sedan. We know what to expect in a luxury sedan. Heated seats, leather seats, heated steering wheels, and all that stuff, all that jazz. And we call it the Mercedes C-Class versus the 3 Series for BMW, right? But that nomenclature becomes a stagnant component in trading, right? JP Morgan has identifiers called SPNs. BlackRock has identifiers called ticker ID. Other people would just call it a fund, okay? And unless you do some data mapping as how an investment manager sees that data versus a broker-dealer versus a custodian, solutions out there are stuck on the taxonomy or stuck on the process, right? Let's go play basketball, Charles. We're on the put our sneaker step or shoe step, right? The investment manager calls it slippers, you call it sneakers, and obviously slippers are faster than sneakers to put on. So they're on the court already ready to go, and you're still trying to tie the ribbons on, right? That's an analogy I would give to you on what the issues are, and they're talking past each other between the nomenclature and the processes, right? And we're helping translate all that, and that's how we can streamline things.
So let's bring things back into the sales conversation, right? And I want you to imagine for a moment that let's figure out a marketing agency, right? So let's say you're giving advice to a marketing agency that says, okay, I want to bring in more clients. So based on just this initial part of the conversation that we've talked about, what advice, if you were to rubber stamp everything that you've learned and getting their attention and now replacing that to a marketing agency, what are you going to tell them? You're going to say, look, here's some of the initial things just based on our initial conversation that you got to make sure you put in order to market and sell to them more effectively.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk specifically if you're trying to work in the finance industry, right? So you're a new company trying to sell B2B in finance. Well, it's a very high mountain to climb. It's probably the highest that you could probably climb outside of, maybe the military industry or medical, right? They expect perfection. They expect utopia. Okay. They want to know that you have staying power. They don't want to take a chance on you and adopt your technology and not have you there in 2 years from now, right? Because it's a lot of paper.
First thing you said, staying power, right?
Yes.
So staying power. So you got to be the safer option, right?
Right.
Okay, so keep going. Okay, so be a safe option.
You have to alleviate the concerns about volatility that you would not be around in the long term, right? That's one concern. The other concern is you have to exude an impeccable product, okay, that addresses specific industry concerns or needs, okay, and then you have to have references for that, right?
Yep.
So I can go into the background. We had the references because we had a background in it, and before my brother and I started this whole adventure, he had a successful experience in saving a consortium of banks that were involved in the consortium on a failed project. And some of these investment managers like BlackRock, Legal & General, and others had a participation in a verbal sense, but not in an investment for themselves. But they saw what he did to save that investment. So he built a reputation saving that investment. And when he came up with this idea, we were able to socialize. If we came up with the Saphyre idea, will you give us a shot? And they said yes, right? In advance. So that's how we came to get the reputation part of this. The rest of it was the marketing side of it. So how to market in this space, let's say, right? So I work with a lot of industry media people. I don't do sponsored articles, okay? Sponsored articles come off as, kind of biased. Everybody knows when they start reading that this is basically paid advertising. The same thing as banner ads on a website. It may get a lot of traffic, but when was the last time you clicked on an ad that was on your favorite news site? Probably never. Okay. So It does help to see visually a brand name to get some brand awareness, but outside of that, I didn't see a lot of effectiveness. So we're all about event sponsorship. So I'll sponsor an event, I'll sponsor a conference. Those things were useful to us. And we would try to find at minimum speaking engagements or thought leadership panel discussions that we can participate in with other leaders in the finance industry. And we would bring some thought-provoking angles on this, especially in our space. We're in the regulatory space where there's a lot of rules and regulations. People are afraid to espouse, why do we have to change things? We've always done it this way with duct tape and straws, right? But no, there's probably better ways to do things today. You should always ask the question why we're doing it today. So we'll bring the thought-provoking components to these media groups by sponsoring these events, and we would repurpose this content. We would film every engagement, so it doesn't die there. If it's if the right target audience isn't showing up to that event, we can still use this for an email campaign, a social media campaign, etc. Right? So having a multi-layered effect when we do sponsored events. And then when we do the sponsored events, the media companies, we would have in advance understanding that they would interview us after we sponsor an event. So I wouldn't do the sponsored ad, I wouldn't do the paid banner ads. They would cover us as legitimate news. As we're acquiring clients and we're having a press release with these clients that you've done the research for, they can write the stories about them, right?
Yeah.
Which gives them validity on what they're writing about, especially since we're breaking news with these top tier clients. So that builds that market validation and staying power between the sponsored events and conferences, the media companies covering us. I just gave a strategy on how you can have media cover you without having a sponsored ad, and then repurposing that content. So even if your ICP, your ideal customer profile, isn't appearing at the event or misses the event, or if there's Chatham House rules, meaning you cannot discuss or disclose what other people are saying on there, we will pre-negotiate in advance that if I or Gabino are speaking there, we will blur out everybody else and cut out and mute out their content and only keep our content that we can repurpose for, again, email campaigns, social media, etc.
So, yeah, I'm going to actually touch upon a lot of the different things that you mentioned here. Number one, when we talk about being the safest option, one of the other strategies that we've also talked about is, and when I say we talked about, this is usually when I'm talking with my board of directors, clients and whatnot, but I'm sure you would tend to agree, is that familiarity helps to create trust. So if it's the first time that these companies ever hear of Saphyre, it's the first time they've ever seen the logo of the company, they're going to be a little bit more skeptical. But when you're sponsoring these events, you're getting this press, you're repurposing this press, you're not the first time. In fact, let me ask you a question, Stephen. When you jump on the phone with somebody and they say, hey, Stephen, I see you everywhere. Those four magic words, I see you everywhere, what impact does that actually have on the closing process?
I think a dramatic impact because they're aware of us over time, right? Branding is probably the longest thing to invest in, but it's probably more relevant for sales today than it ever was. After we did the Series A, my board was like, you should be hiring 10 to 20 salespeople over the next 2 years and to get the word out and get people to come. Well, one, we had a great product. Two, we had a great mousetrap I just described to you earlier. Okay. And three, I know because I've done sales for 20 plus years for big, large corporations that model doesn't work as effectively as it used to. People don't like to be harassed and cold called about knowing about your company through emails and phone calls or messages through social media. They like to have their own learning journey. They like to hear their peers talk about you before they get on the phone or have a meeting with you, right? And that comes across better from brand awareness or speaking about industry issues without promoting your self-interest or your company. Hey, I'm selling this product or service to solve this problem. No, you're benefiting the industry and you're getting your name out. So talking about things that are adjacent to the space, not necessarily to what you do or sell, is still beneficial to your branding and name recognition in the long term. The second thing I would say also is that people buy from people initially. So obviously we have a unique story to talk about the twins and founders in this space. And so especially on social media, we can get into that in just a moment. But my brother and I have taken a very lead step forward as thought leaders in our individual spaces on LinkedIn to get our messaging out, just talk on a regular basis. And it's not always about what Saphyre does, but just the industry in general and addressing the issues. And because they got to know the twins and got to know our individual interests and thought leadership and stuff that has been proven correct over time, they've come to trust us more. And we get more inbound than we do in our outreaches personally to this day.
Well, it's interesting. And there's a lot of things that you talked about there, right? So the founder story, that part is actually really interesting. So there's a few things I want to lean in on. Number one is that when companies launch simultaneously a founder brand and a corporate brand, they tend to do significantly better. On average, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2. It's like a 1.33 plus 1.33 equals 2.66 type benefit. Actually, you get more leads at a lower cost when you're running the same paid ads through a personal brand than you do through the business brand. And there's other, you know, research to support that. If you look at State Farm, for example, there are more. Jake from State Farm, last time I checked, had more followers than actually State Farm, the company itself, even though Jake is a fictional character. You look at Richard Branson. Richard Branson has got more followers than the Virgin Group. Because to your point, like people like to learn more about the person behind it. And when they're ready to do business with the company, then they generally start to follow the company. Founder's brand is incredibly important for establishing the competitive advantage, and all the data supports it. But to go one step further into the founder's brand, you talked about having something unique, those that being identical twin. So way back in the day, when I first got my first tattoo, right? So my first tattoo over here, but the industry told me that I was making a mistake. The industry told me, you're working with people that are professionals. You should be wearing a button-down shirt and you should hide your tattoos, and because that's what people are expecting. And in the beginning, I took that advice, but it was so inauthentic to who I am that eventually I'm like, screw it. So I started showing up in the t-shirts like you see now. And, now I have more tattoos than just that one. And the interesting thing was I had this conversation with a gentleman named Mason Bendewald. He's the one who put P90X on the map. And in that conversation, one of the things that he said to me, and he pointed this out himself, is he goes, Charlie, I want to take a moment just to say that how much I appreciate the tattoos and the t-shirt and the way that you show up. I said, this is interesting because it's been something that's been on my mind for a while, but why do you say that? And he said, when we put P90X on the map, it's because we did something so radically different that people were forced to pay attention because it broke what they believed to be just normal conversation. It was something different. It's like if you walk into your office right now and, you just don't pay attention to the different things on the wall because it's the same thing over and over again. But if there was a spider the size of a dime on the wall, you would zone in right there because it's something different that you just didn't see when you walk in the office. The same thing, twins in a marketplace like this, like it's so different, you can't help but just stop, pay attention for a little bit. A guy with tattoos in a professional business environment, like you got to stop and say, what's actually going on here? And so whatever it is, if it's a physical characteristic, if it's a story, I mean, Seth Godin has got the yellow glasses, which is, he leans in on those yellow glasses, which is often like a different thing. Chris Doe is another guy who wears a hat funny way, a different way and dresses a little differently. But don't be afraid to lean in on what is different about you and really just expand upon that in the founder's band. Did you want to add anything to that, Stephen?
I totally agree. You got to find a way to distinguish yourself, and authenticity is what people appreciate. They hate the filtered, corporate approach. And the more you find ways to stand out authentically, and that you can give a message that's truly humble and honest, I think people appreciate that more. Whatever your interest and personality is, sharing that more about you, they'll buy into potentially your vision and your messaging that you're trying to get out there than if you try to go with the normal rigmarole that the industry does all the time.
And you also talked about LinkedIn. You've got nearly 20,000 followers on LinkedIn. So I know that you're pretty active, on LinkedIn. When we're looking to, I do a lot of work where I build and sales teams and so forth. And so one of the things that we look at, one of the litmus tests when we're bringing in a closer is how active are you on LinkedIn? And you could tell the A players, because especially in B2B, if they're very active on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is more than just a tool where you're going to put out content. LinkedIn is an opportunity for you to engage with your target market, to display your thought leadership, to be able to stay in front of people without being like, Steven, you ready to buy it? You ready to buy it? You ready to buy it? Right? Because the laws of effective frequency dictate that the more brand impressions that somebody has, the more likely that they are to want what it is that you have to buy. And one of the women that we work with, she was ranked as one of the number one I think she was number one female in finance by Forbes. And when we were talking, she said initially, well, how effective, LinkedIn, like, I think my market might be a little bit different. And I said, let's walk through that buyer's journey. What did you do before you agreed to work with us? She's like, well, I went to your LinkedIn profile. So, wow, that's interesting. Okay. And maybe your buyers are different, but okay, you went to my LinkedIn profile. What did you do when you were there? I read it and I distinctly remember there were 6 pieces of content that I read. I'm like, wow, interesting. 6 pieces of content. But you know what shocks me? You didn't connect with me. You didn't like my stuff and you didn't comment. So how am I supposed to know that that actually worked? How are you so confident that actually your market is different? And then she stopped and she thought about it. She's like, okay, you know what? You might be right. But that's, your LinkedIn game. You've got a really solid LinkedIn game, right? So just before we cover some of that other stuff, like what have you learned on LinkedIn for you to turn LinkedIn into an effective tool for you in both marketing and sales?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the B2B entrepreneur space, there's no other better place to have your presence known than on LinkedIn, right? So LinkedIn was built as kind of a recruiting platform, right? So people are curating and updating their career profile on a consistent basis. So it's a reliable source of data on, personnel where they work. And if if you get into LinkedIn ads, which is a totally different story, there's no better place to pay ads than on LinkedIn because you can't find a place where you can find the exact company you want to sell to with the exact titles and roles than on LinkedIn, right? So that's for the advertising side of it. But just in general, to stand out on LinkedIn is probably the easiest place out of any other platform. So Instagram is probably the most exciting platform, but it's hard to stand out. Facebook is oversaturated. TikTok is chasing algos, but LinkedIn is quite boring. And why is it quite boring? Because a lot of corporations have ruined it. And I've seen it happen. So when I worked at a big company and I saw other people work for other big companies, they would always say, "Hey, only post this approved marketing material." So they get this elaborate salesy one pager, and they tell their entire sales force as part of their strategy that everybody has to post at the same time on the same day and saturate LinkedIn with this. And I want you to imagine the platforms aren't that stupid. They know when the same content's being seen by multiple people. The AI and their platform is going to downgrade that content. You're going to get dinged on your algorithm for putting spam on there. When I tell my board and my management team who kind of second guess the whole LinkedIn strategy, they say to me, "Stephen, why are you posting that you're traveling today in beautiful Paris and just talking about the city and the people that you saw?" I'm like, "Because I'm just documenting my journey and getting people into the entrepreneur stuff." But that has nothing to do with Saphyre. I'm like, "Yes, it does." They don't understand. I'm like, imagine LinkedIn and your page as the 13 channels back in the 1980s. What happened when a commercial came on? You walked away and changed the channel. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm putting approved collateral that's all salesy and all I'm doing is selling all the time, I'm putting on commercials that nobody wants to watch or listen to. They're going to turn the channel and not follow anymore.
You're
Right.
right. You're right.
So just like all the other major influencers, I credit a lot of what we learned from Alex Hermosi and team and many others out there.
Yeah.
You want to inform or entertain, and if you can't do those two, then minimum document, right? And just get to the practice of doing it. And on the personal pages, that's the only place you can get an algorithm push on LinkedIn because they really don't. There's an angle, but there isn't really a advertisement push on personal pages. You can only do paid advertising on the company page. So there is no algorithmic push or organic push on company pages, only on personal pages. So that's why you can do the personal branding on the personal page. And then when you do the company branding, it really doesn't work on the company page unless you're paying ads anyway, because that's where they make their money. And they didn't believe it at first, but over the years, they have seen that, yeah, we're growing a larger following. 20 out of the 20,000, maybe 18,000 of those followers are all in the finance space. So I don't have to pay anything for anything I want to share my thoughts in the finance space. They get to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, right? And I encourage employees in our company to share consistent messaging in their own comfortable way, whether that's through text or a quick selfie video, or whatever the parameters that we provide. But I don't want to put a one pager that's approved on here for everyone to share because that's going to hurt our image, not really what the platform wants anyway. So it's kind of the antithesis of what you're trying to do when you're trying to reach to grow a following and community.
Well, if you think about just the nature of a salesperson, right? If you're going to hire somebody for Saphyre and you've got a couple different salespeople that you've been talking with, even if one person is priced a little bit more than the other, but you just really like that person a lot more, you feel much more connected with that person. Earlier in today's conversation, you talked about safe options. If they bonded with you in some fashion and they've connected with you, by nature, you're feeling safer to them. So even if you cost a little bit more, you're already going into a conversation with having some bias towards wanting to work with you. And if everything's just corporate, 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 it becomes a little bit more transactional. But when I learn about things like your trip to Paris, it goes from transactional to now you're telling me something as if we were friends. And, especially if you post something and then all of a sudden I'm interested. I just went to Paris and we jump on a conversation and then it's like, hey, did you happen to go to such and such or such and such? It just changes the dynamic, the conversation. So I think, everything that you're doing there, is right. And it gives you an opportunity. Let's say you're prospecting, Joe over at Acme Finance, right? Well, by by not only liking Joe's content when Joe posts, but leaving a meaningful comment on Joe's posts, Joe's more likely going to reply back to you. And so you're either continuing conversation or starting a conversation, in addition to the fact that you're giving them a like, you're giving them engagement, you're giving them a dopamine hit. So you're giving him something without asking him for something in return. Again, planting all these seeds that help to create more preference towards you. Where you do LinkedIn wrong is, let's go ahead and buy this automation tool and we're going to push hard. Steven, you ready to buy it? You're ready to buy it? You're ready to buy it? You send these long posts, like that's a big mistake.
Right.
Isn't it weird, Steven? We live in this world, especially now with AI, where so many marketers, and I get this message all the time, where it's like, hey, do you have an AI tool that will do this? Do you have something easy that will do this? It doesn't require a lot of work. That doesn't require a lot of time. But when you actually look at like what's driven the millions of dollars that you guys have earned that is converting at the highest level, is any of it attributed to growth hacks and shortcuts and easy buttons?
No, absolutely not. It's always a hard and long way. So if you're looking for a shortcut, you're kind of making it actually longer. You might as well just take the long and true and hard road because that's how any successful entrepreneur makes it, or any successful salesperson or business person. The shortcuts are kind of cosmetic. It's or
Yeah.
maybe they get lucky with a hit, but it's not repeatable. It doesn't build the character and foundation you need anyway. Even though I got a lot of these big wins early as an entrepreneur in Saphyre, it didn't get the momentum that I had hoped. I thought it would just be easy, sitting back and collecting the cash to a certain extent. But no, it's just the same hard work to get the next win as it was for the first win. And so that, yeah, if you're trying to, if you give to the community, you put the effort into it, that pays dividends in a long term. You cannot discount that whatsoever. And so I agree with you on the strategy on authenticity. I mean, you truly give back to the community. You give a meaningful comment. You congratulate your competitors. you praise the prospect even though they turned you down, and you stay humble the whole time because you never know how this game changes. The dynamic changes within an instant, at one moment, and it's happened already in this business and in my previous endeavors. And so we always play the game of patience, right? It may not win you the battle, but it will certainly win you the war.
Yeah, for sure. Now, how do you use PR in your marketing? And that's see a lot of people, they turn around, they get a PR piece and they're like, great, I'm featured in wherever. And then it just dies on the vine because they don't actually do anything with it. So how do you leverage PR within your strategy?
Yeah. So as we're tying these services to new revenue for these companies, and they're excited about using our product and they want to promote us to their external counterparties, we may incentivize them in the commercial discussion that, hey, maybe you get a discount. Maybe we'll waive some of these fees if you promote a press release with us. And they would agree with it. It's actually something we negotiate in some of our contracts. And then beyond that, we look to promote that in social media specifically, because like you said, it dies in the vine unless you happen to be looking at Yahoo News in the press release section and notice a name on that particular day on a Tuesday, then you may have heard about it. Otherwise, yeah, it doesn't get anywhere. And if they come to your website, maybe they catch it in the news page if it happens to be near the top. But you have news that happens on a regular basis, and then it goes down, and that big news that you did with that big client is somewhere on page 3, right? But on social media, you can push it out there. And the cool thing is that if you mention XYZ company, the employees at a company see it, and the friends and connections of other companies also see it. So it just becomes the free organic push. So any press release needs to be in a combination of a social media push. You can't just leave it to the media to promote your news. They got too many things distracting them, and a small company like an entrepreneur that just started a year or two ago is not going to get that attention of Reuters and Bloomberg's to carry you, right? So you have to do the carrying, and you have to create the community and invest in growing that LinkedIn following or any social media platform following. But it's to repurpose that news. So you get, in the case of finance, in the finance industry, so you get that credibility and staying power and checking the boxes that, hey, other customers are truly using you and they're proud about it. They're very public about it.
And here's the thing, and this is what I want people to pay attention to, is that, you know, we talked about being the safer option, but then there's this element of being not safe. And if you're in a competitive organization, let's say, your client, I read Citigroup, right, is one of your clients. And so if I'm in a competitive organization and I'm a decision maker, and I happen to see the press that Citigroup is now using you, now I'm unsafe, because if Citigroup, who's my competitor, is using you and I'm not, do they know something that then I don't know? And if they know something that I don't know, and then my boss comes to me and says, hey, why haven't you spoken with Saphyre? Then I can look like I'm, losing my edge. And so there's this whole strategy around that too. We have a client that wanted to target universities as one of his primary focuses. That was in his super consumer. And so he said, okay, here's the deal. I know you ultimately want to get Harvard and you want to get MIT and a few of those other organizations. But the easiest way for you to get in is Babson, because we have a way to get into Babson. So get into Babson first, and then make sure that you're retargeting and putting in front of them the fact that Babson has then invested with you, because Harvard and MIT and all these other organizations are then going to start paying attention. And after they see that recognition over and over again, it gives you that open door to start a conversation. Hey, by the way, we happen to be doing something with Babson, and, I thought this actually might be worth a conversation to have with you. And sure enough, we did that. And then all of a sudden you see Babson and then MIT picking it up. Now Harvard's going, oh man, like what's going on? All my competitors are starting to do it. Now they feel like they need to do it. And so it's this interesting situation that you're creating when one person's doing it and now other people in your industry are doing it. Then it's the people who aren't doing it are feeling a little left out, almost like they're missing something, which is a very, very important part of the overall mix of things. Now, I know
Go
ahead.
Totally agree with that. I just wanted to add that I would suggest for people to understand this data and what people might be missing is maybe you want to put out benchmarks, right? If you understand the data you're accepting internally. So, for example, in what you're talking about there, a broker that might not be using our technology, if we're tying this to new revenue, as we do with Saphyre, you might not be getting that first trade. Right there's the business risk, right? You see news of peer companies coming on, they may be garnering that business. And so we have a benchmark that we go out there and we say, hey, if you're trading on FX spots, you might not be getting the first trade if you're not ready to trade within 48 hours, right? And that clicks a bell in their head, and a front office trader says, wait a minute, are we using this tech? Can we be ready to start sending RFQs to compete for that business within 48 hours? If we're not doing it, we got to look at the stack, right? It grabs their attention. And the brokers or whoever who've been maybe a little passive or reluctant on looking at technology, or we encourage them, take the pilot, beat the clock, win the trade.
Yeah.
Right. So they're able to see that now. And I totally agree with you. And if we show those examples, then I think we're in a win-win situation.
Awesome. I know we're pushing up against the clock. I feel like there's so many other ways that we can go with this conversation, but I want to be respectful of your time. So this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would you say is your biggest, best tip for our listeners that want to take their business beyond seven figures?
When they get beyond seven figures, the biggest tip is what I said at the start. Tie your business to new revenue. If you could tie it to new revenue, then you beat your competitors, you beat their internal budgets. If I sold to a bank this technology about efficiencies and savings, it would take me 3 to 5 years to convince every single department to sign on. That's my problem within finance. It may be different with other verticals. You tie it to new revenue, that means they're losing out in that business if they're not using your technology, and their competitors may be gaining that business. Okay. So you get a FOMO effect out of that. I think that's the number one thing that we learn. And it's also a reason why we have zero churn in our business, right? So if you're able to
Wow.
create that atmosphere, you have, for 8 years in business with 70 plus clients, we have zero churn. It's amazing.
Whoa. Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest key thing. If you could find an angle to do that with your product or service, that's the best go-to-market strategy. I mean, I can go beyond that, but I'll take a pause there and see if that was the hit.
Give one more tip then. That was a good one. Give one more tip.
On the one more tip, I would talk about if you're trying to build a company and get incentives for your customers, especially in a space like ours. A lot of financial institutions like to take an investment in your firm and have a say in what your business does. And so what we did, my brother and I, we went with an approach of providing a warrant structure. And your audience may not be familiar with warrants, but basically it's providing equity in your company based on earning certain milestones and achievements that have a timestamp on it, right? If you help me get these partnerships or acquire these clients, we will give you a small percent of the company. It could be 0.5%, 1%, whatever it may be. But it's only achievable within this time frame. And what happens is now you're not taking cash, you're tying the equity in your company with achievable milestones and goals that you want for your company. So you don't owe any money and you don't lose any equity unless you make those achievements. While at the same time, these other firms get to have a say in your company by helping you get there.
Wow. You're the first one in the hundreds of episodes that we've done here. You're the first one to recommend that strategy. And I can see how, that works, for some of our agency clients, maybe for a large enterprise, that could be an opportunity, but even bigger than that could be partnerships, right? When you have like a massive, massive partnership, I could see how that angle could be a very interesting angle, especially built on performance. That's really smart, Stephen. Now people want to
The cool thing is when it expires, let's say they don't hit those performance metrics, they're going to feel like they lost out on the equity. You can renegotiate it and offer a higher benchmark and an accelerator on it. So it just is sometimes a never-ending negotiation to help promote business.
And what happens if they're no longer active? Is there a kick in a buyback opportunity, equity, or do they?
You could provide that as a loop back in case they're not active after they earn the equity. Yes, you can do that. But in our cases, we've been able to get good revenue accelerators because of those incentives. At the same time, we don't lose any equity if they don't hit the milestone. So it's a win-win situation for the entrepreneur.
Well done. Well done. Now people want to learn more about you and Saphyre. Where do we take them?
www.saphyre.com, spelled SAPHYRE.com. But the best place is probably LinkedIn, right? So you go on my personal page, Stephen with a PH, Roche, ROCHE. And then my identical twin brother, Gabino Roche, that's GABINO, Roche, ROCHE, or the company page on LinkedIn with Saphyre.
Awesome. Well, we covered a lot in today's session. We started talking about just being the safe option. Then we talked about just the ways of the importance of attaching things to new revenue as opposed to cost savings and so forth, and how that actually has played really, really well for Stephen. Talked about the founder's brand and being unique and something that just makes you more interesting rather than same plain vanilla as everybody else. Something interesting gets people's attention. There's maybe it was Gary Vaynerchuk, I'm not sure, that talks about we're in the attention economy, and that's the thing. If you can find ways to get more attention and keep their attention, it's great. Stephen talked about how he uses LinkedIn, how he balances both the building thought leadership through, through the conversations about its products and benefits and whatnot, but also a little bit more on the personal side, shining light on things like you travel to Paris, which is important to create that affinity and that connection with your market. And he talked about sponsored events. We talked about PR. We've talked a little bit about omni-channel. We've covered a lot. So I appreciate that, Stephen. This has been a really wonderful conversation. We, of course, will wrap things up with this new idea of warrants too, which I've never heard before. And I love coming in. I love having these conversations with really smart people because I get to learn something from these conversations myself. And just as a reminder for our guests, once again, if you're asking yourself questions like, how do I grow my company faster, more predictably, or less dependent on me, check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gadet with my new friend, Stephen Roche of Saphyre, and I will see you in another episode.